Okay, so this week's episode, our guests, they didn't play father and son, but I think one of their characters got called daddy at some point during the show's run. Fellow Travelers stars Matt Bomer and Jonathan Bailey.
Oh, snap.
Oh, gosh, these two. By the way, they've had so much fun throughout the run of like press for the show. I mentioned, in the interview with them, Jonathan's speech at the Critics' Choice Awards, a little, wink and a nod. They've been doing other interviews. Jonathan on, was it Seth Meyers last week? And he was talking about how he chose his prosthetic penis. And then the conversation was just pun-filled from there. I mean, you kind of can't help it with this show.
Yeah.
But all of that to say, it's a very serious show and very dramatic, serious topics in it. But to be able to find some moments of levity, it's nice.
And they're both great, and they have such great chemistry. And also, did you almost like melt from just the sheer force of their handsomeness, like when they were on the Zoom with you? Because I just don't even know how you stay in the same hemisphere with that kind of hotness.
The laptop screen did. I had to get a new laptop over the weekend. But no, honestly, I mean, they pop up and you're just like, Jesus, those are two really daggone good-looking men right there. But they're also just so wonderfully nice. And we'd been trying to get them on the podcast for a while. And just, they're very busy guys. As we talk about in the interview, they got a lot going on. And we weren't able to make it work during leading up to nominations. But even Matt remembered, he was like, I'm so glad we finally made this happen. So it's been a long time coming. But yes, be sure to stick around for that because they, in addition to their two nominations, they're the series creator and showrunner Ron Neiswaner is nominated for writing the first episode of that Showtime limited series. Welcome back to the Awardist. All right, folks, grab yourself maybe a glass of milk to enjoy for this interview. They starred in one of last fall's most talked about limited series, Fellow Travelers, about Hawkins Fuller, a State Department official, and Tim Laughlin, a congressional staffer, who began a hot and heavy romance that spans decades and some very complex layers because of lots of things: their government jobs, McCarthyism, religion, their families, and more. And joining me now are the two men, the two Emmy nominees who played them, Matt Bomer and Jonathan Bailey. Guys, hello, welcome. How are you?
Hi, thank you for having us. Yeah, we were really good.
Good. I'm happy to hear it. Truly appreciate your time and your being here. Jonathan, as you pointed out in your, it was your Critics' Choice Awards speech. I know the two of you come together, so I couldn't just chat with one of you. It had to be the pair.
We're like shampoo and conditioner.
Right. That's what you meant. Yeah, I knew that's what you meant. Yeah. Before we really dig into the reason why you're here, I'd be greatly remiss in not acknowledging really how wildly busy the two of you are. Matt, you've got coming up. It's Jonah Hill's dark comedy Outcome with no big deal, Keanu Reeves and Cameron Diaz. But I also want to say congrats on the series pickup for Mid-Century Modern. This one seems so exciting. I can't wait. For folks who don't know, Will and Grace creators Max Muchnick and David Cohen also created this. Your co-stars are Nathan Lane, Linda Lavin, and Nathan Lee Graham. What has you most excited about this new series?
Really, the creative team. I was lucky enough to get to work with Max and David a bit on Will and Grace, and Jimmy Burrows there, and Nathan Lane is obviously a huge idol. Nathan Lee Graham as well, Linda. So just it's an amazing work environment, and we had, just a criminally fun time on the pilot. So excited to keep that going.
And then Jonathan, gosh, this year you've got Wicked and Heartstopper season 3 are still to come, and then you, Scarlett Johansson, Mahershala Ali, right? You were busy with production on Jurassic World 4. So my question between witches and wizards, dinosaurs, and horny teens, which are harder to deal with?
I'd say the hardest to have dealt with recently is McCarthyism.
Good answer.
That's the scariest beast of them all.
Yeah, and a little wild how it's sometimes still doesn't feel like it's gone. Yeah. Well, and by the way, you filmed, is this true, Fellow Travelers, Wicked, and Bridgerton? You were kind of hopping around all at the same time?
Yeah, was, yeah. I mean, it's and looking back, it's kind of wild. But Matt obviously was an integral part of getting Fellow Travelers made and commissioned with Ron, and there was a tight window to work within the Bridgerton dates, which amazingly, it's testament to producers and just so many people who made it happen. And just towards the end, there was a spate of flying back and forth and I started the choreography for Wicked in London, and I came back and kept Matt alive in the lunch breaks because our trailer would be rocking, and I'd come out all hot and sweaty.
You were working on you. Oh, got it. Yeah.
I was working on
multitasking.
Yeah, on my step gigs.
But I didn't know until he informed me what exactly was going on his side of the trailer.
Oh. Yeah, you thought he might have had another fellow traveler with him or something. Yeah.
No, I mean,
there's only ever one fellow traveler.
That's right.
That I dance with.
But it's a testament to his singular talent, I think, that he was able to wear all of those hats so beautifully. And you never felt that, and wigs. And you never felt that when he was flying back in the night before or whatever it was and just jumping right in. It was really seamless. I think there's probably only a handful of people who are talented enough to pull that off.
I don't know about that. But, I tell you, I do remember there's one particular where I'd come straight back from the airport, straight to set. And it was the scene coming into your office. Where about Roy Kindness.
Yes.
Do you remember that?
Yes, of course.
And I do remember having someone like Matt who led the show sort of unbelievably well, but just in your focus and the work that you put into it meant that you actually were just like, it's okay. So you rely on so many different things but it was a wild time. But thank God
I felt the same with Johnny though, honest, because I think I did 96 out of 100 days on the Fellow Traveler shoot, and 2 of those days were additional photography. 2 of the days off I had were additional photography on Maestro, and so there were so many times when Johnny would come in and just like enervate me and bring an immediacy to a scene and a presence to a scene that forced me into the moment. And I was just so thankful to have a scene partner who made me better every day.
Yeah. Well, I know folks don't always feel that way, and when it happens, it's a really wonderful thing. And I think the thing that that really holds true here is that it comes through on screen between the two of you guys. That that bond, that friendship. So we're very fortunate on our side that happened as well. And I guess this kind of leads into my this question because when EW spoke last year with Fellow Travelers creator and showrunner Ron Neiswanger, I guess it was last summer, he told us how I think it was a Showtime executive texted him after a Zoom meeting with all of you to say, the quote was, "That's the first time I've ever cried during a chemistry read." So it was when you did your chemistry read. I'm curious, did both of you feel that in the chemistry read? Like you knew, like, oh, there's something pretty good here?
I think that was Dante, wasn't it? Dante was Fremantle. Yeah, he was a hero. And
yeah, he was. He was a real champion in getting this made. Yeah.
I don't know. It was such a weird because it was on Zoom and
it was on Zoom. Yes,
and I remember because I was doing a play at the time, and it was obviously at sort of 5:30, and I had to just immediately jump on a bike and bike to the theatre. But it's so bizarre, isn't it? Because you can't. Yeah, I mean, it was the scenes were really sort of moving, obviously, and I just remember, it's like, do you look at the whole? Oh. Do you look at the whole and you look at the face? That's what I couldn't work out. I just sort of, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know exactly. I screen tested for a movie and I was like, am I supposed to look at the camera or the person I'm reading with? And it's kind of an interesting modern day dilemma. But honestly, it was really just a formality to even do the chemistry read. We knew Johnny was the guy. We were so grateful that he was free to be a part of it. And it was just confirmation of what we already knew, that he was brilliant and was going to bring something completely singular to the character. And I'm so grateful that what he was bringing kind of complemented what I was trying to do with Hawk, because one doesn't work without the other.
Completely.
Symbiotic.
But that's what I remember from it, just seeing what you were doing with the character. I was like, oh my goodness, because there's so much that's on the page, but the sort of the ultimate challenge, which I think was sort of Matt did the impossible, I think, which is there's not one moment in Hawk's incredibly complicated arc where you don't understand completely clearly how he's feeling emotionally. The tapestry is so sort of rich, and also he's incredibly empathetic and lost. There's such a love and warmth that is afforded to Tim that when I remember being on the Zoom call and just going, God, I can totally understand why this is something that is a cosmic love affair that lasts, 30 years. So, and then you close the lid and it's quiet.
Right.
Yeah. And by the same token, if that love isn't coming from Tim, that pure love, the character of Hawk just doesn't work. If that's not coming from the other end, everyone would probably just hate him.
and then with Alison Williams and Jelani, because that's the thing I loved about watching it when finally came together, is that there was so much. It felt like just the Tim and Hawk love story felt so full, and then there was these amazing scenes with Dad and Alison, and it was just such a fine balance. I think Ron Niceweiner is just like a genius for construction and doing a character study over 8 hours of television, but. I think you're right. Everything was in fine balance, and
Ron's writing, I felt, really won the day for all of us, carried the day for all of us, because it was so beautiful and so well thought out. And I think he's been with the project for over 10 years now. Mm-hmm. I've been with it for 4, and I know he was there long before I was. So he just had everything really constructed in his mind, and he even had alts and options for different moments over the course of the arc of the story. And he was our guiding light. Really, honestly, in so many regards.
Speaking of Ron with his writing, well, I guess it's kind of a two-part. Was your chemistry read, was that from the first episode, which he's nominated for writing?
Yes, it was.
Okay.
It was a mix. It was the bench scene, I think.
Mm.
Yes, it was the bench scene.
And there was also a scene from the 80s.
Yeah.
So the 80s scene may have been a later episode.
No, episode 3. It was episode 3. You took that.
Yeah.
That was the first one of the picture.
Oh, yeah.
And then he sees the lesions.
Yes. Yeah. So episode 3.
Yeah. Well, you called Ron, kind of the guiding light, but I'm just curious, within the text, was there something from that first episode that each of you kind of used as you went along through the entire shoot as your own personal touchstone, just for the character? Would kind of think back, like, remember this is where we started. This is, when we meet this guy, and what it said about your characters that you carried with you?
No, I think those scenes kind of encapsulate what those characters' relationships are in those specific time periods. So it was interesting just to see how we were going to approach those dynamics. But I don't think we locked into anything. I think what's so wonderful about working with an actor like Johnny is that we don't sit and over discuss anything. I mean, we did sidebar from time to time to go, oh, what if we tried this or that? But I think we wanted it. We knew kind of where we were coming from, and we wanted a lot of those things to happen while the cameras were rolling.
But in terms of Ron's writing in that first episode, though, there's some really beautiful things that encapsulated the intersection and the push and pull of religion and sexuality and identity for Tim. But the confessional, I thought, was a scene that was beautifully written when on the page, and I think when he describes the love as pure as anything he's ever felt, or along those lines, I felt like that was something that experience, and hearing Tim describe it was something that I think carried the character through the years, because that's exactly the final moments between the two of them is that purity and that simplicity, and it's just a feeling of complete abandon and also alignment, I think, that he felt with Hawk. But there were some brilliant details as well with Hawk all along the way in terms of
along the way, for absolutely. I mean, I feel like it's easy to forget that everyone who Hawk has loved before he meets Tim has died.
That's what
whether it was his platoon that he took care of in the war, or whether it was the first love of his life, Kenny. He sort of has this rosebud in the Kenny character who tried to follow him into war and then ended up dying, and he has this traumatic relationship with his father, and so he has all kinds of walls around any kind of intimacy. It's the scariest. Love is the scariest thing to him.
That's also in episode 1, isn't it? Because there's a lot that happens, and actually, the declaration to Tim that happens at the peak of hysteria around that's a beautiful monologue that is in terms of writing as well, and the performance.
Well, we're so grateful that we had Dan Minahan as our director, because I had worked with Dan before. I knew he was the perfect person to kind of set the tone for the show, set the aesthetic for the show. He and Simon Dennis, our director of photography, we all had worked together on Versace, American Crime Story Versace, and he just refused to ever let me lean into any sentimentality. And he was like, you don't get that. And it's so hard to measure an 8-hour performance and to not be able to have any real, you know, just like cracks in the armor until like hour 7 or 8. That's very hard to do. And so, but Dan really locked it in with me in a way that I feel like carried over from the first episode on.
And I guess also in the telling of the story, that's actually that's the bravest thing, right? Yeah. In terms of your performances, but that's a detail that I think you get, you know, to hours 7 and 8, and you forget that it's such a lovely little Easter egg for Hawke that this, because he didn't, that relationship really is there, and that's what I love about Ron's writing, is that he offers something up at the beginning that makes so much sense of the character that then you forget. So if you rewatch it, you go back and you go, of course Hawke had this, you know, there's so much trauma attached to his ability to connect with people.
Right, yeah. Well, given everything that you knew about these characters' journeys across a few decades, there are, of course, some very complicated downs, but some exciting highs. What for each of you was could have been a scene, a sequence, maybe an entire episode that you were maybe dreading a bit, like, oh, I this is the scene that scares me, but we just got to get through it.
I mean, for me, it would probably be the intimacy scene in episode 7.
Yeah,
because I knew I was going to have to go from a drug-fueled
Fire Island episode, right?
In Fire Island, yeah, I knew I was going to have where we have a 3-way, I guess is the simplest way to put it. But I knew I was going to have to go from a really drug-fueled kind of bacchanalian love scene that's really dark into the turning point for the character in the entire episode. He has this tragic secret that he's trying to bury that is suddenly exposed in front of his face. And as Hawke is wont to do when it's exposed, he attacks. And then to go from that to being able to rely on my scene partner and fall into the complete vulnerability of the character for the first time was and we didn't film those things separately. It all went in one take. So I knew that was going to be a scary day, but thankfully I had Johnny as my scene partner. And I think we had worked together enough at that moment that I knew I could trust him with anything. And I mean, I think there was even a moment when, in one of my takes, when I was really emotionally connecting, my wig slipped down, and he very sweetly just put it back in place so that the tears wouldn't be lost.
I had my little pot of glue in my pocket. And when I say my pocket, I mean I don't think I had any.
No, we didn't. I don't think either of us had pockets at that time.
But it was beautifully directed by Destiny.
Yeah, Destiny Akaraga.
And Morgan came on as talk about what a performance and a character to come in, and he was an amazing sport. But that performance of Matt's, I think, is just knockout. That scene. And also, just to go back to Ron's writing, I think that's a really good example of what he does best, which is you set up this whole sort of chemical, sort of erotic, almost, it's all like the soundtrack is almost like you go into this sort of wavy porno sort of retro, and then he pulls the rug just at a moment where you think you know where the scene's going. And that's where the emotion just sort of pours out. It's so clever.
He surprises you with what you expect.
Yeah.
So he leads you down one path and then completely surprises you with some kind of juxtaposition. And I think with any kind of art, that's what's most exciting to see.
Totally, yeah.
What scared you the most? You have a single one? Or...
Oh, yeah. I don't. What scared me the most? A lot of them scared me, really. It was funny. It's like it's absolute fear, and but then driven by a sort of joyful sort of abandon, because you have to just sort of free fall. But I just think, appearing in every decade and just establishing, making sure that the spirit of the character, especially Tim's spirit, which I think is pretty, blinding. But and I guess the final scene, we knew that the relationship was so. And the character study of Hawke as well. Just wanted, I suppose, the fear of playing the last scenes and making sure that you can serve the writing
and get out of your own way and not try to overplay anything.
The truth is that when the writing is that good, you actually all the work was done by that point.
Yeah. You were always my guidepost in each decade, because I feel like Hawke doesn't change as much, but Tim was going through all these beautiful change. It's not really till the 80s that Hawke really starts to make some really profound changes.
Yeah.
And so it was always one of my favorite days on set to see Johnny in a new decade. We tried not to unveil our looks to each other until we were on set.
I was going to ask. Yeah. Yeah, I was going to ask if you waited to see each other, if there were like, did you go through different tests for, the variations of facial hair and stuff like that?
Made sure that we didn't see each other, and we got on the days we get ready in separate trailers. I think on those days where just for the reveal.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Matt, I'm glad you brought up episode 7 because that's one I had noted as just it's just. My God, it's a devastating episode, and it's so profound and impactful and unforgettable. Really, it's rough. So kudos to you on that because it's a really incredible episode of TV.
There's also the moment of the Harvey Milk, with Hawk at the end of it, which I think is one of my favorite moments. The whole 8 hours.
He's really witnessing for the first time this whole community outside of him that's socially aware that he's not a part of, that he is alienated from because of the choices he's made. And even though he's had this whole Bacchanalian experience on Fire Island, he's sort of been in the thick of the shadow of it all and not in the light of the community, which is so socially active and aware. And he's witnessed that there is a beauty to the community that he belongs to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, there certainly was much ado about those sexy time scenes, which I know you guys have spoken about ad nauseum at this point, I'm sure. But what I am actually curious about is how perhaps did those evolve from the way they were originally written to what we see on screen? Like, did the trust and the protection that you developed between each other impact then what you were perhaps more open to filming?
I think that the first scenes when they come together were so detailed, like it was so specific and on the page that I think if you compared it to the script, it's all there, which actually I think emboldened us then to go forth. And there definitely were moments where we would, what an amazing thing to be able to have someone that you could just go, could be this, just so you know, and also the joy of then being able to surprise the director and Ron as well, but in ways that were just adding, making it as real as possible, because the sex scenes, and as we were saying in episode 7, it served such a function, that elongated power play between Hawk and Morgan's character and Tim, and every single intimate scene I think is a study of power, and so
it's like a therapeutic release for both of the characters too, because the way they come together is so indicative of the way they react to the oppressive society that they're in. Hawk in one way and Tim in another, and they're never the same after the scene as they were before. But so much of it was on the page. It was just so great to have a scene partner like Johnny, especially when the scenes were so well written, because they just felt like acting scenes. And I didn't dissociate or leave my body. I felt like, because we knew each other's boundaries and comfortabilities, we could still play in the moment in an intimacy scene. So it was never overly choreographed or like, okay, and on this line I'll put my hand here, and on this line I'll do this. It was between the writing and having such an amazing scene partner. It was the first time I felt like I could be in my body in a scene like that.
Because also, when you're dealing with the sort of vitriol of McCarthy and the way that he addresses gay men as perverts and as threats to society, of course, that's the level of oppression is coming specifically towards people who have sex or have a certain leaning in terms of their eroticism. And so, of course, when it comes down to it, it's so important in this to if the sex scene didn't exist in this, it wouldn't have hammered home the nuance. And so I think also as actors who have done sex scenes throughout our career in different ways, I think the idea of being able to do this, playing 2 gay characters, it's just the study, the sort of acting study of it, and the listening, because I think in a world where they're cast aside and they can't be themselves, it's an amazing thing to play. And that, I think, meant that we were emboldened to go forward and make sure that they were always different.
Yeah. And in the 50s, they really are some of the scenes where Hawk is the most free. In the entire decade.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But to your point about the scenes, because they are so important for illustrating that power and all of that. Once upon a time, not all that long ago, this is a series that I don't think would have been made, or at least if it did, those scenes would not exist in the way that we see them here in this form. And and it likely probably would have been two straight men playing these characters. So in those regards, like, sure, great progress has been made, but still a long way to go. Like, how would you quantify where we've come, where we're going with queer storytelling?
I have to say, creatively on this, so much of my cynicism was obliterated, particularly by the fact we were lucky enough to work with Fremantle and Showtime, who from the beginning were giving us notes that weren't constricting at all. They were actually really liberating. They were saying, no, go farther, embarrass yourself, go too far, try to scare us, try to see how far you can push it. And that kind of permission, I felt, even bled into the acting work on set, because it came from the people who were in power, who could make those decisions. And so I don't know, I feel like, I just feel so grateful that we had a group of people behind us who really believed in Ron's writing and the story, and us, our whole cast, and really got behind us and gave us the opportunity to put this project together and put it out in the world. Because yeah, you're right. Maybe 10 years ago, it would have existed in a different way. I don't even know if I would have seen the script for it 10 years ago.
Yeah. It's also a love letter to the people that came before us, I think, generally in the community. And thinking about that, there are so many people have loved gay and bisexual actors for so long, without knowing that they are, without the actors being able to speak about their identity. And, there's a beautiful sort of, to think about Ron having written Philadelphia, which was a landmark film that was instrumental, I'm sure, to so many people. And Tom Hanks' performance was absolutely knockout. I obviously grew up loving seeing minimal but brilliant gay stories. Yeah. And of course, majority of them played by straight actors. The majority of awards go to straight actors playing gay, because there's this sense that means that they're somehow brave, or that they're mixing it up. And there is a bruise that I think, looking back now, where there's a very real, and has been, sense that there aren't out gay men playing their experience. These characters, of course they're rich, of course they're complicated, of course they're exactly the sort of stories that you'd want to tell, because they're so complicated, there's so much pain, and there's so much suffering, there's so much resilience, and there's so much spirit in it. Yeah. But my gosh, I would never for a second wish that I hadn't seen Brokeback Mountain or Gus Van Sant's Milk, and Cate Blanchett playing Carol. But I do wonder, I just hope that people understand that it's not just about all actors can play everything. I mean, that's what I believe, but there's an X, Y axis. There's also what's available to certain actors. Mm-hmm. And there hasn't been, when we're talking about, had this been made 5-10 years ago, I completely believe that I would have been able to play a straight lead before I would have been able to play gay. And that's kind of wild. And that's the thing that it makes me, I just can't wait for actors to just include that nuance when they say, I think everyone should play everything. Because if you don't actually address that, then you're showing a slight ignorance. But my gosh, I'm so grateful for all those stories going up.
Yeah, it's really about opportunity that, may the best actor play the role, but may everybody have the opportunity to at least, shoot their shot.
Yeah, and it's okay just to hang tight for a bit, and just to open a door for certain people. And of course, there will be a moment in time where I hope we're all working towards that everyone can play everything.
My prayer with this was always like, okay, let's just serve this material the best we can. Let's not drop the ball, so that other folks get the same opportunity going forward. And
which is also, I think, I totally understand that pressure, and I think that's also an example of a slight lack of privilege and availability. Going into these things, you do feel like we have to smash this. This has to be brilliant. We have to we have to bring something to this. And I suppose that's what drives everyone in this. And and we're not talking about just gay creatives, but everyone who's surrounding this project lent in that way, because it was an opportunity as well as just a brilliant story. And until we get to just brilliant stories, that we've there is a level of pressure that you feel.
Yeah, and there is. And then I mean, not to sound too esoteric, but at a certain point you let that go and just focus on your work as an actor. Totally. And I did feel like there were so many moments on this project that reminded me that this show was bigger than any of its single parts. Like, there were voices that really felt like they wanted to come through this material, and there were so many roadblocks that we went up against in development, and even when we were in production, even in post-production,
the strike
and everything else, that somehow something shifted so that it all worked out for the best for the show. So it was just, it felt like such a privilege just to get to be a part of it, because I was getting to partake in something that was so much bigger than any of us.
Totally. You know? And also, you know, it might never be this rich for us. Yeah. We've talked about this. This is the Emmy nominations are amazing, but they also mean that we get to talk about it one last time.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's about so many things, but the people who've come before us to allow us to be in the position where we can take these roles, and for us to have both been available to do it, it's amazing.
Yeah, well, and something I want to ask, and more so just so that you have an opportunity to maybe kind of like clarify any reports, because, you know, I guess I can kind of call it a byproduct of this. When you guys were at or maybe just you, Jonathan, but at the HRC event in DC, and then there was the story about being in the coffee shop, and the guy took your HRC hat off, threw it down, threatened to shoot you. A woman started recording. Like that's kind of the thing that we're still talking about, is that, you know, like that fear mongering, how it diminishes human equity. And, you know, the series starts in the 50s, but that's something that here, you know, 7 decades later, still experiencing. But that particular incident, was it like what was the reality of that incident for you from a, you know, emotional perspective?
Yeah, I mean, it was really overwhelming and upsetting. I think the contrast of being there, it was my first trip to America in terms of going to a gala and celebrating Matt, and being in that room with all the amazing speakers, and it was just such a electric fervour to like everyone's front-footed approach to fundraising for a community that's obviously still marginalised and oppressed. And then to go from that, and I woke up the next day and I honestly felt like I was in a sort of montage of a B movie, because I was like, the sun was out and I was listening and I was like, this is it, I get it. I get what this is about. I can see what my platform is, and I can see how I can use this. And went into a coffee shop, and then someone threatens, you know, and says, "Get out of my country, you queer. If you don't do that, I'll shoot you." And it was like really upsetting. I within a week had called Jonathan Anderson to make the T-shirt, and so actually, it was the most activating thing that possibly could have happened. So there's a love letter I should write to the man from Pennsylvania.
Yeah. I'm sorry it happened, but to find a silver lining like that is
but also,
so admirable.
You know, it was before the show had launched. It was in DC. It was literally around the corner from the White House. It was, you know, talk about a magic, you know, it's an awful thing. It's horrendous. I just think about
so
the kids.
Upsetting to hear someone you love go through an experience like that, especially when they were there to support you.
Yeah, I know. Well, I'd go anywhere to support you, but but I just thought about that man from Pennsylvania. It's like, can you imagine if that was your teacher, your cousin, your father, your brother? I thought about it. Really reminded me of my privilege, but also that these pockets of the world where, you know, people don't have any sort of ally. So that's why, you know, this series being on a streaming platform, and the letters and the outpouring of what's the word, sort of energy and support, but also people's stories, and there's just
I mean, that's been the best part of this whole experience for me, is just people seeing their own humanity reflected in the story, whether it's their own personally or somebody they loved, or they had an uncle who was a Hawk, or a cousin who was a Tim, or an aunt who was a Lucy, or they knew a Marcus or a Frankie. Like, they really see either themselves or someone they loved in these characters. And it's just been the most beautiful. Like, people have cried, people have been upset, people have, you know, they're like 20-minute conversations. It's not just like, oh, hey, I really enjoyed that show.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's I was going to ask you, as we wrap up here, what this series and being, you know, getting the chance to play these characters has meant to you. But I think we kind of just got the answer there, because of course the internet was taken over with memes and all kinds of stuff from, you know, various scenes of this show. But there's something much more profound here that I hope is what is left behind. That is the legacy of this story. So congrats to both of you.
I think also it's a story for everyone, because the shame permeates, isn't it? Through, and that's what I think is beautiful about Matt's performance, but the character study of Hawk as well, about the people who are surrounding him, who are in his orbit, are the ones that really get chewed up. and then that then goes down generations. So I hope as many people can see it as possible.
For me, getting to be a part of this was so educational and life affirming, and filled me with so much gratitude for the people whose shoulders we all stand on, especially characters like Tim. And so it's just so great to be reminded of that, and to have been a part of a project that put that out into the world.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I offer my thanks to the two of you for bringing this story to folks, and of course to everyone else behind the scenes who made this series happen. I'm just grateful that it's something I got to watch and experience in my lifetime, and I hope others do as well. They can check it out on if you have Showtime with Paramount Plus subscription, it is there, so you can watch all 8 episodes. Matt Bomer, Jonathan Bailey, thank you both so much.
Thank you for having me. Amazing.
Well, I'm so glad, like I said earlier, that we got to speak with them. They said right after our interview ended that was their very last interview together.
Oh,
that was the last thing that they were doing. So we caught them right at the tail end, and I'm so glad we did, because obviously they're very busy guys. Jonathan he's back into production on Jurassic Park 4, whichever one it's being called. He's got Wicked coming up, so much going on. But my gosh, that story about that run-in with that guy in a coffee shop. It's just, I don't know. I just don't understand the ease with which people are okay being so hateful toward others. But I'm glad he found a silver lining in it, as he talked about.
Yeah, and I'm glad that somebody there immediately stepped up and started filming to hold that person accountable. I mean, you always think of that Mr. Rogers quote, "Look for the helpers." And it's like in situations like that, it's awful that somebody feels the ability, feels so comfortable just being so hateful. But then, not only did Jonathan find a silver lining, but also that there was somebody there who was not going to let it happen without standing up for him.
Yeah. Well, and the thing that I think about in those kinds of incidents too is that obviously Jonathan wasn't the problem. That guy's problems are his own issues, and that's that I in some regards I feel bad for the person who has like that kind of hate in their heart. Like, you go work on yourself before you tell other people to get out of your way.
Exactly.
But anyway, and my gosh, Matt is I kind of wondered if he was going to say the Fire Island episode to that question, because it's just such coming off of his family, that character's Hawk's family tragedy, and just trying to escape that. And my gosh, that episode was that one was a real roller coaster.
It was. And it's just, Hawk is it's an environment that is obviously so alien to him, which is poignant in its own way, and just but you really feel for him, because not only there's loss in terms of the life he wasn't allowed to live, but also he also has the outsider's perspective of maybe this isn't the best way we should be using our freedom right now, so there's so much in so many layers to that episode. I'm not surprised that was the most daunting for him.
Yeah. And I'm glad they shouted her out, but I got to say, Allison Williams just had some, she was great throughout, but those last, I think it was like the last 2 episodes, she had some really fantastic stuff, especially when she then went to San Francisco, and finally met Tim as he's, in the kind of last days or so of his life. Some really great stuff from her too. But that series, definitely worth checking out, but it is not one I would recommend binge watching.
You'll need to interject episogreat like Great British Baking Show or something in between to just chill out a little bit. It's very intense.
That's a great option to use to decompress with that one.